Every night at 3:47 a.m., Ellen would wake up to the same thing. A voice whispering behind her ear. Not Cantonese, not any language she recognized. At first, she tried to ignore it, but then her hands began moving on their own, twisting strange symbols in the air like someone else was controlling her body. That was when Ellen realized something had followed her home from Thailand, all because she accepted a free souvenir. This story comes from Hong Kong, and it begins with a woman named Ellen. At the time, Ellen was doing well in life. She was in her mid-50s and owned several properties around Hong Kong. The rental income alone was more than enough to sustain her. She didn't work, and neither did her closest circle of friends. They had all made a fortune through the stock market and Hong Kong's rising property prices. Most of them were essentially retired, simply looking for ways to enjoy their free time. They traveled often, a familiar group of middle-aged Hong Kong housewives, always planning their next getaway. This time, it was Chiang Mai, Thailand, a week-long package tour booked through a Hong Kong travel company. Everything had been arranged: the flights, hotels, meals, and sightseeing. The first few days were exactly what they had hoped for. They followed the tour bus from temple to market to cafes and waterfalls, snapping photos and trying new foods, laughing like schoolgirls again. But on their last full day in Thailand, something unexpected came up. During breakfast at the hotel buffet, one of the women mentioned she had a distant relative living in Thailand. Through him, she had just learned about a local spiritual master performing a rare ritual that evening. The location was only a short drive from their hotel. The women were curious. It wasn't part of their tour itinerary, but it sounded interesting, something different. They joked about asking for better luck in stocks or blessings for health and longevity. They weren't exactly superstitious, just curious. So after dinner that evening, the group stepped out of their usual comfort zone. No tour guide, just the 6 of them following a vague address written on the back of a hotel napkin. They had no idea what kind of ritual they were about to walk into. The building didn't look like much from the outside, just a small single-story structure tucked behind a narrow alley. But the moment they stepped inside, they realized this was nothing like the temples they had visited earlier in the week. There were no golden Buddha statues, no peaceful incense drifting through the air. Instead, the room was dim and silent, lit only by oil lamps placed along the walls. Strange talismans hung from the ceiling beams. The atmosphere felt heavy, ancient, almost secretive, like something straight out of an old Thai horror movie. The women hesitated, but they had already come this far. Inside the room were around 30 locals, all standing quietly with their eyes fixed on a figure in the center. The shaman, he sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by offerings. The ritual began. Chanting echoed through the room. Smoke rose from burning herbs. The shaman's hands moved suddenly and violently as he formed strange gestures in the air. To Ellen and her friends, it almost felt like watching a performance. Nearly an hour passed. Finally, the shaman stood up and held 3 strings of dark, worn prayer beads. He spoke to the crowd. One of the locals nearby translated into Cantonese. The beads had been blessed, and he would give them to 3 lucky people in the room. Immediately, the crowd surged forward. Ellen didn't even know what the beads were meant for, but they were free, and there were only 3. Her hand shot up instantly. So did everyone else. Somehow, the shaman pointed at her. Ellen laughed as she accepted the beads, proudly showing them to her friends. None of them got one. Only her. She felt lucky. But in Cantonese, there's an old saying, "Don't be greedy for small benefits." It's a warning older people say when something seems too good to be true. Free things often come with hidden costs. Before dismissing the crowd, the shaman gave the 3 recipients one final instruction. They were to wear the beads every night before sleeping. They also had to chant a short mantra. He repeated the words slowly until they memorized the rhythm. The ritual, he said, would bring wealth and prosperity if performed faithfully. Ellen didn't understand the language, but the rhythm stuck in her mind. Back at the hotel, her friends teased her. "If those beads make you rich, you better buy all of us dinner." Ellen laughed and held onto the beads like a prize. The next morning, they returned to Hong Kong, and Ellen followed the instructions. Every night before bed, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, slipped the beads over her neck, and chanted the mantra softly. At first, nothing happened. 2 weeks passed. No sudden fortune. No lucky investments. No miracles. But on the 15th night, something answered her chant. Ellen heard a voice. It started as a faint whisper behind her right ear. She turned around. No one was there. The voice returned again, still whispering, still unfamiliar. Soon, something even stranger began happening. While chanting, Ellen's hands started moving on their own. Her fingers twisted into strange shapes in the air, symbols she had never seen before. Her body was moving without her control. Frightened, Ellen stopped the ritual. She threw the beads into a drawer, but the voice didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder. Every night between 3:00 and 4:00 a.m., Ellen would suddenly wake up. She would find herself sitting upright in bed, her hands moving in the darkness like someone else was controlling them. Her friends noticed changes. Ellen looked exhausted, pale, older. Soon she began having the same nightmare every night. She was standing inside a wooden hut, somewhere humid and dim, somewhere in Southeast Asia. But she wasn't herself. She was someone else. A man. In the dream, the man was arguing violently with a young woman. Then suddenly, the scene changed. He was standing on top of a tall building, wind blowing around him. Before Ellen could move, before she could stop him, the man ran forward and jumped. Every time she woke up just before hitting the ground. Eventually, Ellen realized something terrifying. Those weren't dreams. They were memories, but not her own. Convinced the beads were cursed, she threw them away. But by then, it was too late. The voice stayed. Doctors could find nothing wrong with her. Finally, Ellen contacted the tour guide from Thailand. After hearing her story, the guide said he had heard of similar cases before. Some shamans placed curses on tourists using blessed objects. The objects acted as vessels for spirits, and the only way to remove the curse was to return to the shaman. Ellen booked a flight immediately, but on the day of her departure, while standing at the airport security line, the voice screamed in her ear. Everything went black. She collapsed. Doctors admitted her to the hospital. That night at 3:47 a.m., Ellen jumped from the 9th floor window. No one knows exactly what happened in that hospital room, but some believe the beads didn't just carry a spirit. They were meant to pass it on, and Ellen became the next victim